Have you ever stopped to think how a simple, everyday gesture can turn your life upside down? Sometimes it's something trivial, a different route to work, an unexpected phone call, or, as in the case of Anthony Delgado, choosing a flower shop. He only wanted to buy a beautiful bouquet to impress his girlfriend during dinner, nothing extraordinary. But that place, with its scent of fresh flowers and welcoming silence, held something he could never have foreseen. The past. A past that would not only confront him unexpectedly, but would shake everything he believed was under control. It was in that small space, nestled between roses and orchids, that he realized some wounds never fully heal. What would you do if, out of the blue, you encountered someone who had deeply marked your life, right when you least expected it? And what if that person had moved on in a way that, without uttering a word, exposed every mistake you made? For Anthony, the answers came in silence and hurt more than any argument. He froze in time when he saw Emily, his ex-wife, behind the counter, calmly arranging a bouquet as if she were exactly where she belonged. It was as if the universe had set the scene just for him, with every detail in its proper place. And in that moment, he knew. This wasn't just a reunion, it was a mirror. Anthony Delgado was a well-known name in Los Angeles. Owner of a high-end development company, he had become a benchmark in luxury and innovation within the real estate sector. At 60, with well-groomed hair and a steadfast gaze, he seemed to have the perfect life, profitable businesses, prestige, and a young girlfriend named Nicole, 20 years his junior, who accompanied him to events as an extension of his success. That afternoon, while driving through Beverly Hills, Anthony spotted the display of a charming flower shop called Desert Blooms. There was something about the place that drew him in, perhaps the simplicity amid the city's excess, or maybe it was just instinct. He parked, walked in, and as he crossed the threshold, he felt that something in the air was different. He didn't understand it at first. The aroma of the flowers mixed with the cool air conditioning enveloped him like an unexpected hug. The ambiance was inviting, with arrangements carefully placed on light wooden pedestals and walls adorned with artificial vines. Anthony approached the counter, mentally rehearsing his order. He wanted something sophisticated, but not overdone. And then time stopped. On the other side of the counter, with hands slightly smudged with dirt and a look he knew all too well, stood Emily. Her hair, once dark, now showed strands of grey. But her eyes were the same depth, the same silence that spoke more than words ever could. The impact was immediate. The man who was accustomed to making multi-million-dollar decisions in luxurious boardrooms now found himself lost before a woman in a floral apron with calloused hands. Anthony tried to maintain his composure. He took a deep breath, but his chest ached as if he'd been punched. Emily, on the other hand, appeared unfazed. There was a serenity in her, as if this situation had been anticipated, or perhaps simply accepted. She greeted him with a "Good afternoon, how may I help you?" Firm, polite, distant. The tone was professional, yet her eyes revealed everything: memories resurfacing, wounds that never healed, and perhaps just a hint of restrained surprise. Anthony didn't know whether to stay or turn around and leave. That flower shop was the last place he would have ever imagined encountering Emily. In the old days, she had dreamed of having something of her own, a venture that embraced nature, beauty, and lightness. He, on the other hand, had dismissed that as a waste of time. "Flowers don't pay the bills," he had once argued during one of their many debates about the future. Now here she was, surrounded by flowers in a place that seemed to have stepped right out of her long-forgotten dreams, and he was merely trying to impress someone with whom, deep down, he wasn't even sure he truly wanted to be. The bouquet, once a symbol of affection, now seemed ridiculous in his hands. "Any bouquet is fine," he said, attempting to sound casual, but his voice trembled as if his throat refused to cooperate with the lie. Emily nodded and calmly turned to select one of the prepared arrangements. As she wrapped the bouquet with a golden ribbon, Anthony watched her hands. They were no longer those of the young woman he once led to the altar. They were the hands of someone who had rebuilt her life, who had learned to cope with pain and transform it into beauty. Small scars on her fingers told stories he had never known. Suddenly he realized he knew absolutely nothing about the woman she had become. The payment was quick. Neither mentioned the past, yet it lingered between them like the scent of the surrounding flowers. As Emily handed over the bouquet, her fingers brushed against Anthony's for a fleeting second. It was enough to crack the ice that had built up in his chest, and perhaps in hers as well. He left the shop silently, as if fleeing a place where he had seen more than he wished. Inside his car, he started the engine, but didn't drive away immediately. He glanced at the seat beside him where the bouquet rested, wondering if that dinner with Nicole still made sense. For the first time in a long while, he felt he had lost control. On his drive home, Anthony's heart pounded, not out of passion, but from an unease he couldn't ignore. The Los Angeles traffic seemed slower than usual, as if time itself were urging him to think. The image of Emily behind the counter kept returning like a vivid memory that refused to fade. He tried to dismiss the thoughts, put on some music, focus on the evening ahead with Nicole. But it was no use. Something inside him had been awakened. Something he didn't want to admit, yet it was. There, alert and hungry for answers. That very night, Anthony met Nicole at the restaurant where they had reserved a table. The venue was elegant, with dim lighting, ambient music, and well-trained waiters. She looked beautiful as always, wearing a form-fitting black dress and high heels, yet he couldn't focus on a word she said. Plans for the upcoming weekend, comments about the decor, even compliments about the wine, all passed by him as if he were submerged underwater. "Anthony, are you listening to me?" she asked sharply with a hint of impatience. He smiled, trying to cover it up. "Of course. Sorry. It's been a hectic day at the office." Another lie, uttered on autopilot by someone who had been lying for years without remorse. The bouquet sat on the table in a crystal vase. Nicole complimented it, saying he was becoming more romantic, but Anthony barely heard her. Each flower seemed to carry the weight of a story he had left behind. And no matter how hard he tried to convince himself that life was now different, that the past no longer mattered, the discomfort within him only grew. He remembered when he and Emily had dreamed of building something together, not just a business or a house, but a life. He recalled how harsh, impatient, and blind he had been to her needs, and now, seeing her so complete, secure, at peace, made him realize how little he had truly grown as a person. Nicole suggested they go to his place after dinner. Anthony hesitated for a moment, then made up another excuse. "I have an early meeting with an investor from San Diego." She didn't insist, but her disappointment was evident. He dropped her off at home, promising to call the next day, and returned to his mansion atop Laurel Canyon. There, he poured himself a whiskey and went out onto the terrace, watching the city lights below. For the first time in a long while, all of that, the luxury, the success, the enormous house, felt empty. Then, on a whim, he grabbed his phone and Googled "Desert Blooms Los Angeles." He wanted to know more. He wanted to understand how Emily had managed to make a life bloom amid neglect. The flower shop's website was simple, beautiful, unpretentious, exactly like the physical store. It featured photos of delicate arrangements, floral events, weddings, But what truly captivated Anthony was one specific image. Emily, smiling, beside a wall covered in native Californian plants. She looked light, happy, not the performative happiness he saw all too often on social media, but something genuine. In the About Us section, a brief text recounted her journey, a background in botany, years working in nurseries and flower shops, and a specialization in sustainable design. Anthony felt a pang in his chest. It was as if he had discovered a version of her he had never cared to know. He remembered all the times he had dismissed Emily's dreams. He had called her ideas about sustainability, conscious landscaping, and therapeutic gardening nonsense. You should focus on something that really makes money, he used to say, with that arrogant tone of someone who believes success is measured solely in numbers. Now, years later, there she was, the owner of her own business, respected in her field, following exactly what he once ridiculed. And him, he remained the same executive who never truly took the time to listen. A bitter sensation overwhelmed him. For the first time, he began to wonder, had he been the villain in his own story? That night, sleep eluded him. Anthony tossed and turned, restless, unable to stop thinking. He recalled the last time he saw Emily before the divorce was finalized, the harsh words exchanged, the ensuing silence. He had never bothered to find out how she was, never asked if she needed anything, not even sent an email. He thought he was doing the right thing, that moving on was the best path. But now, seeing where she had ended up and what he had become, everything seemed turned upside down. The pride he once felt for his empire now rang hollow. The woman he had considered too fragile for the business world had blossomed, and he, on the other hand, had only accumulated figures. The next morning, he arrived at the company early, not for meetings or deadlines, but because he needed to distract himself, anything to stop the thoughts. In the elevator, he looked at his own reflection and felt that something had changed. It wasn't physical. It was as if he had lost the firmness in his gaze. He spent the entire morning pretending to be busy, giving orders. He barely listened to himself. At noon, he locked himself in an empty meeting room, opened his laptop, and on impulse sent an email to Emily. It was direct, brief, almost timid. I saw that you're in charge of Desert Blooms. Your work is impressive. If you ever have time for a coffee, I'd love to talk. He didn't expect a reply, but sending that message was, in itself, an act of surrender. The reply didn't come that day, nor the next, and Anthony tried to pretend he didn't care, though the truth was he checked his email obsessively, like a teenager waiting for a message after confessing his love. Until, on the third day, it arrived. Hi, Anthony. I must admit I was surprised by your message. Coffee? Sure. I have a free slot on Friday at 3 p.m. If you'd like to come by the shop, I'll see you in the back, where I set up the larger arrangements. It's quieter there. It was simple, without any pretense, but he read it several times, as if searching for a hidden meaning. He was nervous, very nervous, more so than when he closed million-dollar deals. Friday came, and Anthony found himself choosing his clothes with unusual care. Nothing too flashy, yet he didn't want to appear unkempt either. He opted for a light blue shirt and tailored trousers, leaving his luxury watch aside. He couldn't explain why, but it seemed out of place for the moment. When he arrived at Desert Blooms, the familiar doorbell chimed as before. The shop was calm, fragrant, almost magical. The staff recognized him and, with a polite smile, directed him to the back. There, he found Emily seated at a wooden table, arranging a vase of succulents. "You actually came," she said without rising, though a slight smile played on her lips that he couldn't quite decipher. Anthony sat in front of her cautiously, as if entering a sacred space. Emily offered him coffee, as if it were just another ordinary afternoon. But for him, it was anything but ordinary. The scent of damp earth, of fresh flowers, the ambient sounds of the street, it all felt more intense. When she placed the cup before him and asked, "Still take it without sugar?" He froze. She remembered. After all that time, she remembered. "Yes, still without sugar," he replied, almost swallowing hard. They fell silent for a few seconds, and in that silence there was more truth than in many of the dinners Anthony had had over the years. They didn't quite know how to start, but they both knew they needed to speak. "You must be wondering how I ended up here," Emily said, breaking the ice. Anthony nodded respectfully. "After the divorce, I had to relearn how to be myself. I went back to studying, worked hard, and gradually created this space. It wasn't easy, but it was real." She spoke with serenity, without bitterness or anger, which for Anthony hurt even more. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to say he was sorry, that he recognized how harsh, selfish, and insensitive he had been. But none of those words seemed sufficient. "You did what I never had the courage to do," he said, looking at her hands, the very hands he once held at the altar. "You built something beautiful, with your own hands." Emily looked at him calmly, as if hearing something long expected. There was no vanity in the way she accepted the compliment, only a quiet acknowledgement from someone who knew exactly the path she had taken. "I built this because it was all I had left, Anthony. I didn't have capital or support. I only had my ideas, my stubbornness, and a lot of no's along the way. Every flower here was planted with a piece of all I experienced, even with the pain of what didn't work out between us." Anthony lowered his gaze. He felt small in the presence of the woman he hadn't known how to care for, yet who now shone with her own light, serene and steadfast. He tried to explain himself, talking about how he had lost himself in the business world, how success became an addiction, and how he had neglected his personal life, believing that love fit only into the leftover moments of time. Emily listened in silence, without interrupting. "I know you were trying to win, Anthony. I just wanted you to let me win in my own way too." That phrase lingered in the air like a truth that had never been spoken so clearly. For the first time, he understood what she felt. Not as a wounded ex-partner, but as a woman who only wanted to be heard and respected by the one who claimed to love her. "Did you know our daughter is pursuing a doctorate in biology?" Emily asked almost casually, but with her eyes fixed on his. Anthony's eyes widened in confusion. "Our daughter," he repeated, as if caught by a revelation he should have known. Emily nodded. "Yes, Clara. She's in San Francisco working on urban ecosystem restoration projects. She's loved plants since she was little. Remember how she enjoyed helping in the garden?" Anthony closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered, but he had long forgotten. Her name, spoken with such simplicity, struck him like a blow. He had no idea she had taken that path, nor where she was now. She harbors some resentment, you know, and with good reason. But she's also curious. She asks about you every now and then, not too often, but enough for me to notice that a part of her still wants to understand what happened. Emily spoke with a blend of pain and maturity. Anthony felt a lump in his throat. No matter how much he tried to defend himself, he knew there was no excuse for his absence. "Do you think I could speak with her someday?" he asked, almost in a whisper. Emily didn't reply immediately. She picked up a flower from a vase nearby and twirled its stem between her fingers. "Maybe, but not with words. Clara will want to see actions. She'll want to know if you have truly changed or if it's just guilt disguised as interest." Anthony knew those words were fair, even though they stung. A coffee or a visit wouldn't be enough to mend. 15 years of silence. Time doesn't rewind, and he was far from being the same man who abandoned Emily and distanced himself from their daughter. But for the first time, he felt a genuine desire to change, not to please anyone, but because the person he was, or the person he pretended to be, no longer made sense. He looked around the small greenhouse they were in. Every plant seemed to tell a story of overcoming, adaptation, and new beginnings. And he understood. Perhaps there was still time to replant what had been left to wither. In the days that followed, something began to stir within him. At work, he started paying attention to details he had once ignored. He began questioning projects that featured artificial, lifeless gardens. He ordered his team to research sustainable solutions. This intrigued his partners. "Since when do you care about this ecological talk?" one remarked mockingly. But Anthony said nothing, not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew that for now, showing was more important than explaining. Deep down, he still wasn't entirely sure what he was seeking. He only knew he no longer wanted to recognize himself in that mirror, staring back every morning. The following week, he returned to Desert Blooms, this time without a bouquet, without excuses. Emily was at the back of the shop, labeling pots with native species. When she saw him, she simply raised an eyebrow and said, "You're back?" Anthony offered an awkward smile. "Yes, but not to talk. I came to learn." She looked at him with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. "Learn what? About flowers?" he asked. He nodded. "About how to build something that doesn't have to be sold later, something with purpose. You might laugh. I know how that sounds coming from me." Emily didn't laugh. Instead, she pointed to a gardening glove on the table. "Then start by taking off that jacket and grabbing that shovel. Here, we work with our hands." That afternoon, under the Los Angeles sun, Anthony learned to plant. Really plant. He felt the texture of the soil, measured the right amount of water, and took care with the roots. Emily guided him patiently, explaining each species, each technique. And gradually, he began setting aside the image of an executive to become, if only for a few hours, a man trying to understand what he'd never had the courage to ask. When the sun began to set, Emily offered him a small bottle of water and said, "Clara will come visit the shop next month. There's an event. Here, perhaps it's a good beginning." Anthony clutched the bottle as if it were the only thing keeping him steady. And in that moment, he knew. That was his new starting point. The days that followed were unlike anything Anthony had ever experienced. In the morning, he went to the company, still leading meetings, analyzing investments, making decisions. But in the afternoon, whenever possible, he discreetly appeared at Desert Blooms. Emily never said she was expecting him, but she allowed him to stay. Sometimes he helped with inventory, other times he watered the plants, learned about species resistant to the dry Los Angeles climate, and understood the difference between an ornamental garden and one with ecological purpose. Gradually, without realizing it, he began to dismantle his certainties, and without uttering a word, Emily showed him that starting over requires humility and time. One day, while labeling lavender pots, Anthony saw a photo of Emily with a smiling young woman holding a prize. "Is that her?" he asked, pointing. Emily confirmed with a slight nod. "Clara. That was at the Urban Ecology Conference last year. She presented a project on restoring degraded areas. She received an honorable mention." Anthony was speechless. He felt a pride burning in his chest and a shame that chilled his fingers. "She looks so much like you," he remarked, and Emily simply smiled. "But she has a lot of you too, especially that stubborn streak." The comment drew a Genuine laugh from both. For the first time in a long while, they laughed together. It was brief, but it was real. That same day, Emily handed him a small pot with a spiny plant. It's a desert cactus. It withstands the heat, survives with little water, but it grows slowly. It demands patience. Anthony accepted the gift as if it were a trophy. He placed it on his office desk next to models of multi-million-dollar buildings. Some colleagues mocked him, dismissing it as another passing eccentricity. But to him, that little cactus was a symbol of something much greater, the beginning of a new way to see the world and himself. For the first time, he wanted something to grow without haste, without needing to impress anyone. He just wanted it to thrive. The event Emily had mentioned was approaching, a fair of local producers and sustainable initiatives, organized in partnership with universities and environmental NGOs. Clara was scheduled to speak as a guest. Anthony had confirmed his attendance, yet he was more nervous than ever. He didn't know what to say, how to act, or even how to dress. He bought a simple shirt without any logo. He arrived early and sat at the back, watching his daughter's presentation with a racing heart. She spoke with determination, with a sparkle in her eyes, with the passion of someone who truly believes in what she says. When the presentation ended, everyone applauded, and he, quietly, joined in. As she left the stage, Emily approached her. She whispered something, and Clara glanced in Anthony's direction. For the first time in many years, their eyes met. That brief exchange of glances felt as if time had stopped. Clara walked over to him with steady steps, without haste. She stopped about a meter away. "Hi," she said curtly, but without hostility. He replied with a barely audible, "Hi." He didn't try to explain or say more than necessary. He simply extended his hand in the most sincere gesture he could offer at that moment. Clara hesitated, then accepted. The handshake was brief, yet Anthony felt that it carried an opportunity, not to reclaim the past, but to plant a new beginning. One that might take time, but he had learned that the best things grow slowly. In the days that followed, Clara didn't seek him out, but she also didn't avoid contact. They exchanged occasional messages. He sent articles on sustainable architecture, and she sent photos of native plants. Emily continued her routine at the flower shop, now with Anthony more present and helping where he could. He remained the same man in many ways, stubborn, methodical, direct, but now there was room for listening, for silence, for waiting. Gradually, his company began to implement new ideas. He even hired specialists to redesign the gardens in his projects using local species, reducing water consumption and promoting biodiversity. The changes didn't please everyone, but he no longer did anything just to please others. One morning, upon entering his office, he saw the small cactus Emily had given him, now sporting a tiny blooming flower. He smiled. That solitary plant was the liveliest thing in the room. He picked up his phone and sent a short message to Clara. "The cactus has bloomed. Whenever you want to see it, it's here." She replied with a photo of a seedling she was nurturing, captioned, "This one will be for your new project, if you do it right." And for the first time, he allowed himself to believe it wasn't too late. He didn't just want to build buildings, he wanted to build bridges. And in that simple exchange between father and daughter, he understood that some flowers only bloom after the longest storms, but when they do, they are the most resilient of all. Quote of the day: "Sometimes life prunes us, but it's only to show that even the desert can bloom when we learn to care about what truly matters." If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and activate notifications. This helps us keep bringing real and moving stories like this, and tell us in the comments, From which city are you watching? We'd love to know how far this story has reached. Thank you for being part of this community. Until the next story,